Hey, what's going on, guys? A couple days ago, it was announced that Bellator lightweight champion Usman Nurmagomedov tested positive for a banned substance and has been suspended by the California State Athletic Commission. And with this story, there's really a lot to unpack. The consequences for Usman Nurmagomedov, what did he test positive for? We're going to discuss the narrative that has been put out by a lot of MMA fans that this somehow proves that PED usage and steroid usage is running rampant amongst the Dagestani fighters. We're going to discuss one of the statements that Conor McGregor put out that I thought was particularly egregious. We're going to discuss the conspiracy theory about USADA and Dagestani fighters. We're going to expose the mainstream MMA media. We're going to take a look at Brent Primus' statement and how I think he's being punished the most out of this whole situation. So there's a lot to get to, but let's start off with what happened. Usman Nurmagomedov tested positive for a banned substance, and he has been suspended by the California State Athletic Commission for 6 months. He has been fined $50,000. His win against Brent Primus has been overturned to a no contest, and also he's being forced to enroll in WADA testing. So essentially, he has to fit the bill for randomized drug testing for I don't know how long. It's not been specified yet. Now, what happens in Bellator with drug testing? Because a lot of people may not be super familiar with what goes on with Bellator in terms of drug testing. And the answer is nothing goes on with Bellator and drug testing. Bellator does not do any drug testing. If you remember years ago, Dana White used to hide behind the line, we're regulated by the government, because at a point in time in the UFC, there was a lot of guys abusing PEDs, and it was so obvious, and there were certain fighters calling it out, and there was media members actually asking about it. And at one point, Dana White finally folded and signed USADA to a deal, which they're now getting rid of. But at one point, he used to say, well, we're just regulated by the government. And what that meant was the athletic commissions did the drug testing. Now, the athletic commissions would only really drug test the week of the fight. So I'm assuming, based on the information we have, that Usman Nurmagomedov's, PED test or banned substance test, the fact that the win against Brent Primus is being overturned to a no contest, I'm assuming that this stems from the week of the fight against Brent Primus. That's the best, information we have right now. We don't have the date of the test, but these athletic commissions don't go around randomized drug testing. They don't do that because it doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense if you've applied for a license. So it was prior to that fight or the night of the fight. Well, how does that make sense? How did he get caught then? How does anyone get caught then? Well, the problem with that drug testing to begin with is you have to be an idiot to get caught. If you got caught by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, or any commission for that matter, California State Athletic Commission, you basically had to be an idiot because you knew what was happening. You knew it was usually during the weigh-ins or the night of the fight that you were being drug tested. So basically, you would cycle off beforehand and you'd be perfectly fine. That's how a lot of people got away with it. The only way to actually catch cheaters is randomized drug testing. Well, how did Usman Nurmagomedov get caught? Well, let's take a look at a statement from Ali Abdelaziz, who is his manager. He said, and I quote, Usman was prescribed medication for an illness he had. It's not an anabolic steroid, EPO, HGH, etc., nothing enhancing. He will rematch Primus and he will get back into the tournament. So there is a lightweight Grand Prix going on right now. He's been withdrawn from it. Apparently he's going to re-enter it, but he has not been stripped of his lightweight title. Now, I know you might say, well, Ali Abdelaziz is his manager. Of course he's going to lie and cover for him. Well, if you cross-reference what Ali Abdelaziz said, combined with the punishments from the California State Athletic Commission, it kind of lines up, The California Athletic Commission, if this was an anabolic steroid, if it was an EPO, if it was an HGH, there would be a much harsher penalty for Usman Nurmagomedov. He would be suspended for much longer. And also, if Usman Nurmagomedov really wanted to use steroids, and if he is using steroids, he's not going to get caught on a test like this. It's just not going to happen because you know when the test is coming. So I believe 100% what Ali Abdelaziz is saying right now, based on the information we have, that, look, he would have gotten a TUE for it, which is a therapeutic use exemption. Essentially, when you're sick or you need something that's technically against the rules, you have to apply for a TUE, which means you're getting an exemption to use this because a doctor is prescribing it to you because you may be sick or etc. So essentially, had Usman Nurmagomedov applied for that, he would have been free to go. We would have never even heard of this. It probably happens all the time, more times than you would ever know in terms of TUEs, but there was no reason for him to attempt to use a substance to gain an advantage during the week of the fight when he knows he's going to be tested by the athletic commission. That's literally the only time that he can be caught essentially for PED use. Well, now you have Brent Primus come out and make a statement. I feel bad for Brent Primus, actually. But he came out and said, I just can't believe a young, undefeated fighter coming from a camp he's coming from would cheat and use a banned substance. And essentially, he's being sarcastic here. And we're going to come back kind of to that statement in a little bit, because essentially what he's implying is, oh, the Dagestani fighters are known for PED usage. Okay, first off, Brent Primus is being punished more than anyone, because if you heard what I said about Ali Abdelaziz, his statement, he said he will rematch Primus and get back in the tournament. Referring to Usman Nurmagomedov will rematch Brent Primus and get back in the Bellator lightweight Grand Prix. Well, guess what? Usman Nurmagomedov just 50-45'd him. Based on the information we have, there was really no performance enhancing. That's a bad fight for Brent Primus. I mean, to have to fight Usman Nurmagomedov twice, that's a punishment. I would turn down that fight if I was him. So, he can make these statements and kind of, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek sarcasm, but it's not really fair to him. I mean, to be honest, if the Athletic Commission knows that this was just if they can use documentation to confirm that this was prescribed by a doctor and there was no ill intent, this shouldn't be overturned to a no contest. Fine him, okay? Suspend him for 6 months, but why overturn it? If you can truly determine that there was no real malice here, why overturn it to a no contest and now he's got to rematch Brent Primus? I don't want to see that. Nobody wants to see that. And it doesn't really make any sense. And I doubt Brent Primus even wants that. So he's being punished even though he doesn't deserve it. But you also now have people saying, well, this confirms that the Dagestani fighters are using steroids, they're using PEDs. It's running rampant amongst the Dagestani fighters. And this has been a claim for a long time. This has been something that really has been going on and being called out for the last few years or so, even honestly longer than that. But what this is this is just people that hate Dagestani fighters, truly. This is exactly what it is, that they are good fighters, or a lot of them are good fighters. Not even all of them are good fighters. I mean, there's plenty of them that we can call out that are actually bad fighters. But because they have a high rate of success, there's been a large portion of the fan base that dislike these fighters for one reason or another, because they're from Dagestan, because they're Muslim, just because they're good, because they beat their favorite fighter, something along those lines. They portray this narrative when there's really not a whole lot of evidence to back it up. And you can't condemn an entire group of people because one person tests positive for a test. And on top of that, when you look at the test that happened with Usman Nurmagomedov, and you look at the full information and you use your critical thinking, you're like, well, most likely he wasn't using an anabolic steroid. The information we have right now is that he did not. The punishment from the California State Athletic Commission shows that it's not. Of course, would I love to know the actual name of the substance that he tested positive for? Yes. And I'm sure we'll find that out. But these people who their favorite fighters are Colby Covington and Bryce Mitchell and, Sean Strickland, and then meanwhile, they constantly hate on Dagestani fighters and call them boring and they're all cheaters, and they bring up Islam Makhachev's failed test from years ago that actually wasn't even really a failed test. These people are just haters, and they want to push that narrative onto an entire group of people just because they don't like that they're successful. And I think it's particularly ridiculous. And I wanted to call it out in this video because a lot of people won't say that. They'll get a lot of backlash. Oh, how could you defend the Dagestani fighters? They're known cheaters and blah, blah. And there's been people that have said for years, oh, the Dagestani fighters get to hide over in Dagestan and they hide from USADA. Well, first off, there's been plenty of fighters that have tested positive from over in Dagestan. I mean, I don't have the full list in front of me, but there's been some fighters that have tested positive. There's been plenty of fighters. So if they're able to hide over there and not be able to be caught for PED use, well, wait a second, how did some of them get caught? There was even one fighter a few years ago, it was a heavyweight. He got banned for life because he tested positive multiple times, and it was actually something bad. But just because some fighters may cheat or test positive for banned substances, that doesn't mean every single one of them is cheating. And what's funny about this, and I hate to even use this example because I know people are going to think that I'm hating on this particular fighter. You don't hear me bringing up this guy's negative or this positive test. Sean O'Malley tested positive twice for, I believe it was Ostrine, I think is how you pronounce it. Well, guess what? Recently, his teammate, Kyler Phillips, tested positive for that same drug. Okay? And there was no excuse. There was no, I was prescribed. There was no paper trail to defend it. There was nothing. But you don't see those same people saying, oh, Sean O'Malley's camp's definitely doing it. Even though multiple from his camp have tested positive for the same thing, even years apart. You don't see that, and that's actually randomized drug testing that's catching them. It's not, oh, it's the week of the fight, because you have to be dumb to get caught the week of the fight. So this whole entire narrative that, oh, well, Dagestani fighters are cheating and that's why they're good and that's why they win titles is just ridiculous. And the conspiracy theory about they get to hide from USADA because of, they're over in Dagestan. Okay, maybe it's harder for them to get tested, but guess what? They get tested and some of them get found to be positive. So that just proves that whole narrative completely wrong. Now, you also have Conor McGregor come out and say that, he's come out and said it doesn't surprise him. I'm not going to go through every statement that he said, but I want to read a particular statement to you. He tweeted out, "Steroids are haram. The shame of Allah hangs over the Nurmagomedov clan. Cheaters. Abdulmanap is doing tumbles in his grave." This man is literally bringing up Khabib Nurmagomedov's dead father. Oh, he's tumbling in his grave because of this. Now, keep in mind, Conor McGregor deletes all these tweets. There was multiple other ones. I'm not going to cover them. But to bring up somebody's dead father because you got smashed badly and finished with a neck crank back in, 2018? We're talking 5 years ago. Dude is still hashing out and taking out vendettas for losses from 5-6 years ago. That is crazy. Talk about Uncle Rico. Dude is living in the past. And to bring up somebody's dead father or dead relative, because these guys, a lot of these guys are related one way or another, is some of the most despicable stuff I've seen. And guess what? The mainstream MMA media, MMA fighting, MMA junkie, they cannot stand but to do an article every time Conor McGregor farts. They got to write an article about Conor McGregor. Every single tweet that Conor McGregor ever does, they write an article. Well, guess what? Before I decided to do this video, I said, let me Google and see if any of them wrote an article about Conor McGregor talking about Khabib Nurmagomedov's dead father tumbling in his grave over PED usage, which wasn't even really PED usage. It was an illness, a medication prescribed for that illness. Well, I look at it and I see, oh, Sports Illustrated covered it. MMA News covered it. Low Kick MMA covered it. Talk Sport. Oh, where's MMA fighting? I don't see MMA fighting. Where's MMA junk? Nope, they don't cover it because guess what? They are under the UFC's thumb. They don't care. They don't care. They're not going to cover that. They had nothing to make Conor McGregor look bad. They're not going to cover that unless they absolutely have to. This man is talking about someone's dead relative because someone was prescribed a drug for an illness that he did not seek a TUE for, a therapeutic use exemption. And the MMA mainstream media is not using it. What an absolute disgrace. I've said this before, I'll say it again. MMA fighting, MMA junkie, they got one foot in the grave and another on a banana peel. And meanwhile, they're gargling up Dana White. That's essentially what they're doing. They refuse to ask any good questions. They refuse to write any decent articles. And that's why MMA media is dying as a whole. Because no one is willing to ever hold any stars or the UFC accountable ever. They're nothing but UFC shills. They would be blacklisted by Dana White and the UFC. Oh, you wrote that terrible article about Conor McGregor. Meanwhile, and this is the part I really want to harp on. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor left the USADA pool, randomized drug testing. He left the USADA pool for literally years and literally abused PEDs, supposedly under the ruse to heal his leg. But keep in mind, he just re-entered the USADA pool a couple months ago, like a month or two ago. Oh, well, he broke his leg all the way in July of 2021. So for 2.5 years, apparently, according to his defenders, he had to use PEDs to heal his leg. Meanwhile, the entire time Chris Weidman suffered the same injury, was in the USADA pool, was being tested the entire time, and returned sooner than him. But meanwhile, Conor McGregor's literally abusing PEDs, and he basically admitted it on his Twitter. He came out and said, I think it was early in 2023, basically, oh, I'll be cleared for testing soon. Well, why aren't you cleared for testing now? Oh, that's right, because you have PEDs in your system. The UFC is literally getting rid of USADA for Conor McGregor. They're literally getting ready. And I know people say, oh, well, Conor's not going to fight until after the 6 months or whatever, the waiting period. There's a waiting period for USADA, so a fighter can't leave the USADA testing pool and then come back. That's not the point. The point isn't that the UFC is getting rid of USADA so Conor McGregor can jump back in earlier than 6 months. The point is the friction between USADA and the UFC over the 6-month waiting period is what caused the departure. But the UFC is still going to abide by that rule because it looks horrific if they don't abide by that rule. That's what's really going on here. So this guy, Conor McGregor, literally looks like a jealous ex. I mean, he can't get over the fact that Khabib Nurmagomedov destroyed him in 2018, October of 2018, I believe it was. UFC 229, if I'm not mistaken. He literally can't get over it. He's like a jealous ex, and he's got to bring up somebody's dead relative to get his point across. And on top of all that, he deletes it all because guess what? He's probably drunk or on cocaine, and he's like, oh no, I got to delete it now, even though everyone already saw it. So it's his way of pushing that narrative without actually having to push that narrative. But really, in the meantime, it's all it is just trying to character assassinate certain fighters and tarnish their legacy, saying they're on PEDs. Meanwhile, this guy is literally a known cheater, essentially. He's using a loophole to be able to use steroids. But what happens with Usman Nurmagomedov? He's not going to be stripped of his belt. He's suspended for 6 months, which really isn't even a real suspension because half the time guys don't even fight in a 6-month period anyway. I'm assuming it's retroactive to the date of the test, or the day he last fought, so it'll be 6 months from then. He's going to get a rematch with Brent Primus, which is an easy matchup, and he's going to be right back in the tournament for Bellator. So honestly, I think the punishment fits the crime. It's not a very harsh punishment, and it's not a very harsh crime. If they have the documentation to prove that, he was prescribed a medication that he did not disclose, he still needs to be punished for that, but it shouldn't be a year suspension. It shouldn't be a 2-year suspension. But ultimately, this dumb narrative that somehow all Dagestanis are on PEDs just because Usman Nurmagomedov tested positive for a prescription, it's just disgusting. It's disturbing. And it just shows a lot of people hate certain fighters because of where they're from. And they all go along. And a lot of them hate the Dagestanis just because of what Khabib Nurmagomedov did to Conor McGregor many, many years ago. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.